I think we might be able to safely say that parenting a teenager is one of the biggest challenges you will face in your role as a mum or dad. More than ever, we are navigating this challenge with new and more complex dilemmas being thrown at us along the way, whether around social media and gaming exposure, mental health difficulties, or supporting them through a global pandemic and lockdown when the last place they want to be is stuck at home. Inevitably, there will be those times when you can feel really proud of yourself for how you're fulfilling this role. But maybe, like me, plenty of other times when you feel like you're getting it all wrong and momentously failing at it. This is the rollercoaster of parenting, and it is the journey that we're all on in an attempt to nurture and guide our children into balanced, safe, happy, and healthy adults. As with any journey, there will of course be those ups and downs, but as we learn more about what's going on in the brains of our teenagers, we are able to not only learn new strategies to use within our parenting, but also appreciate that our job as parents is not always about getting it right and being perfect. We can make mistakes and still be the good enough parent needed to achieve that desired goal of getting them successfully to adulthood. So, in this lesson, we're going to apply the knowledge that we have about the teenage brain to learn ways of staying connected with them as they instinctively move away from us into independence. We will learn about some of the key principles that can be applied in this relationship, or any relationship to be honest, and we'll consider how these create that connection, but also allow space for the necessary boundaries and discipline that will inevitably be part of your interactions with them. We'll then end with sharing some take-home messages so that you can start to try out some of these ideas with your teenager. So, what's going on in the teenage brain that we need to hold in mind? If you remember back to part 1 of this course, you'll recall learning about the disconnection in the teenage brain. The idea that all the ingredients, if you like, are there in their brain, but that the component parts, those that make up the emotional brain and the thinking brain, are not yet working together in unison to inform behaviour. You learnt about how this can result in some of the typical teenage behaviours that we see, such as impulsivity and risk-taking, emotional volatility, and an apparent disregard for the consequence of their actions. Whilst this kind of understanding helps us enormously to make sense of their behaviour, we can also use this to guide how they need to be parented during this time and what they're able to manage within our relationship with them. We can further combine this knowledge with what we learnt in the previous session of this part of the course, where we thought about our individual attachment patterns and the development of attachments over childhood. If you recall, one of the tasks of a teenager is to begin the transfer of their attachments outside of the family towards their peer group and eventually into their romantic relationships. However, you'll also remember me saying that whilst this is a primary goal for a teenager, they don't lose the need to stay connected and attached to their parents during this time. What we will consider in this lesson, therefore, is how we achieve the right balance between allowing this transferring of attachments to take place whilst also maintaining this connection. So, how do we do this? We start from the position that our children typically want to get along with us. It may not always feel like this as they push against our boundaries, rebel against our rules, and appear to reject our offers of nurture and care. But they do. However, they want it alongside their assertion of their own identity and creation of their own rules for living. So, we start to create this balance, therefore, with our first principle, which is curiosity. Being curious about the ways in which our teenager is experiencing this period of their life is one of the best ways of connecting with them. Showing our interest in them through being curious brings them close at a time when they otherwise might feel quite distant from us. We may already feel like we're using curiosity in our conversations with our teenagers by asking them questions about maybe how school was, or what they would like to do at the weekend, or in their future, or what they want for dinner. However, curiosity in this form can be experienced by our teenagers as us interfering, or maybe even placing demands on them. The kind of curiosity I'm referring to is one in which we're assuming a wandering stance about what it's like to be them, without judgment, without assumption, or without demand. What sense are they making of themselves? How do they think they're feeling? What ideas do they have about their behaviour? And then we can use what we find out to see if there are any ways in which we can help them in areas that they're struggling to achieve much sense. In this way, we can build connection by using curiosity to understand better why our teenager does what they do, built upon the idea that all of their behaviour comes from somewhere. We can think this because behaviour never exists in isolation. It's always driven by a range of factors, including our emotions, our thoughts, our perceptions, our beliefs and hopes, our desires or motives, our past experiences. It always serves a function. It might be to communicate something, achieve something, learn something, or even teach someone else something. If we engage in curiosity around where our teenage behaviour comes from, we're able to really show them that we're interested in understanding them better. We can do this by wondering out loud with them. So something like, I wonder how that might make you feel, or I wonder what happened to make you feel that way. I wonder if you have any ideas why that happened. We can also use curiosity to share with our teenager what we think might be happening. So something like, I wonder if what you wanted to happen was that we would say that you could go out at the weekend, and because we haven't been able to say that, you're feeling really disappointed and upset with us because it was something that you were really looking forward to. Or, I wonder if it always feels like we're saying no to things and that's why you get so angry with us. Being curious with your teenager includes asking questions and sharing your understanding with them to see if it matches with their understanding, or perhaps helps them to develop a new understanding of a situation or a behaviour. It might include working things out together and making guesses that may prove to be right or wrong, but are focused on trying to make sense of experiences for your teenager. If you get even some of those guesses right, it shows them that you get it, that you get them, and this is what deepens their connection. When we curiously explore, we get to know our teenager better, and when we offer this in a non-judgmental fashion, we help them to feel safer to share more of their internal world with us, reducing the need to use their behaviour to do this instead. Starting this exploration with "I wonder" statements is very different from starting with "Why did you do that?", which tends to be experienced as more confrontational and perhaps more shaming. This makes it a more accessible conversation for your teenager to have with you. And as we use curiosity to build this connection, we're also helping our teenager to understand and organise their experiences as they are benefiting from the sense that we're able to make from our more mature and integrated emotional and thinking brain. The organisation of knowledge that their brains are not yet able to fully engage with. It encourages them to develop important life skills that are not just about understanding their inner world better, but also being able to be more open to exploring and understanding the inner worlds of others. This in turn helps them to be more in control of their feelings, which in turn again helps them to better manage their relationships. Our parenting to achieve connection doesn't stop with curiosity, however. The most powerful influence in a child's life comes not from evaluation, but from acceptance, and this is our second principle. Having used curiosity to better understand our teenagers' inner world, if we can then show them acceptance of this inner world, we're not only going to experience greater connection, but we can then use this connection to guide and influence how they behave with others, because they feel safer within our relationship with them. In this context, it's our job as parents to judge or evaluate our child's behaviour. It's our responsibility to show them through this judgment what behaviours are acceptable or not. However, what we mustn't judge is where that behaviour comes from. So as we said before, all behaviour comes from somewhere. The source of the behaviour, whether that's an emotion, an experience, a thought, a desire, a motive, a belief, or a past experience, is unique to all of us. As such, it cannot be judged as right or wrong. So acceptance in this context means, therefore, accepting why our teenager acted in the ways that they did, because we accept where the act came from, not accepting how they acted. Offering acceptance in this way demonstrates to them that their inner world is safe because it's not being judged. It also shows our teenagers that they are heard and they are understood, that we can validate those feelings even when those feelings may be very different in some instances to how we might be feeling. This is not easy, by the way. When something tricky happens, the instinct most of us have is to react to the behaviour. We might do this by perhaps getting angry and grounding them maybe, or we might go into problem solving to try and find a way out of the difficult situation, or we may offer reassurance to them. The conversation might go something like, "How could you have been so stupid? Didn't you stop and think about what might happen if you did that?" Or, "Okay, what are you going to do now to make this okay again?" Or maybe, "I'm sure everything will be okay by the time you go back to school. At least you have other friends that you can hang out with if Jack isn't talking to you today." We all do this. We react to the behaviour because we are making a judgment that it needs a response, and then we can move on. This manages, we think, both our teenagers' behaviour and possibly the anxiety that their behaviour is causing us as their parents. That response may be to ground at them, or shout at them, or shame them into not doing it again. It may be to offer reassurance, because when someone shares with us something that is painful or difficult, we want to take that pain or hurt away, especially when it's coming from our children. However, the difficulty with all these responses is that they ignore the reason for the behaviour in the first place. Whilst you could argue, for example, that reassurance offers your teenager some optimism that everything will be okay, if this is not how it's feeling to them in that moment, your response doesn't match what's driving their behaviour, and it will be experienced as invalidation rather than optimism. It will be perceived by your teenager as though they should be feeling something different to how they are. And this can have the effect of either drawing you into a battle or them shutting down and disconnecting as they feel misunderstood or not heard. We all need to be heard, and we're more likely to be open if we know that we're going to be received, heard, understood and validated. So if our teenager is sharing with us a difficult time at school, or a challenge in how to manage a friendship fallout, or is expressing anger towards us for stopping them doing something they want to do, one of the best things we can do is show them acceptance. So if we go back to the scenario used earlier, it might go something like this, starting with your curiosity. "I wonder if it always feels like we say no to things and that's why you get so angry with us." "Yeah, it does feel like you always say no. I'm never allowed to do anything or have any fun." And then moving into acceptance. "It sounds like you feel you don't ever get to do anything or have any fun. And if it feels like that, I can see why you get so angry with us. It's true, everyone else gets to do stuff that I'm not allowed to. I can understand it's hard if it feels like everyone else is getting to do things that you want to do too. That would make you even more angry with us, I'm sure. But when you're feeling that angry, we have to find another way to deal with that, because it's not okay when you're feeling like that to talk to us in that way." Conversations that go something like this, where we're able to show our teenager that we understand where their behaviour comes from, even when we don't like it, because we're not judging the experiences that are driving them, shows them that their inner world is safe. It shows them that we can sit together with any uncomfortable feelings, and allows them to be more accepting of the consequences that may be necessary in the form of discipline, because the understanding has been offered to them first. And this allows them to appreciate more our motivation for addressing their behaviour, because they can see this comes from a place of being valued rather than judged. This can lead us into a conversation then that has more of that problem-solving focus, encouraging them to think about what ideas they have to sort out the problem situation, or what they could do should this happen again in the future. So adding something like, "I wonder if you have any ideas of what you could do differently if you get that angry with us again. Is there anything we can do to help you with that?" If we can offer them acceptance, they will be more able to engage their thinking brain with their emotional brain to come up with the ideas. Curiosity and acceptance work. They're not easy to always offer, but when we can, we will hopefully reap the benefits. However, there is another principle that we also need to consider, and that is our use of empathy. Empathy may not be something that immediately springs to mind to offer your teenager, especially if you're listening to this after a blazing row with them. However, the curiosity and acceptance that we've already talked about lead quite naturally into empathy. In the previous scenario, if we can add in statements such as, "I'm really sorry it feels like you're not able to do the things you want, or the things that your friends can do. I can see how hard that is for you." We are showing our ability to put ourselves in the emotional shoes of our teenager, and this will help us to further connect with them. We can only truly empathise if we have developed sufficient understanding of our teenager to be able to imaginatively enter into their inner emotional world, hence the need for the curiosity. What empathy offers our teenager is an experience of our compassion towards them and our offering of support so that they know that they don't need to deal with the difficult feelings on their own. Knowing that you are there to emotionally co-regulate your teenager not only feels supportive and comforting, but also communicates that what they're feeling is okay. It's understandable and it's not too much for us to manage together. You might also find that it's very difficult to stay defensive with someone when they're being empathic with us. There are a number of ways of showing empathy to our teenager. We can use what we call active listening, which includes things like maintaining eye contact, not interrupting them, expressing interest and using validation and reflection to encourage continued talking. We can also use what we call reflective listening, which essentially means communicating in an emotional way through our facial expressions, our gestures, our posture and our tone of voice. It's about matching the vitality of the emotion being communicated by your teenager, so that when they are loud and angry, you communicate back to them in a similarly intense way, not to sound angry back, but using your tone and volume to mirror theirs. Equally, when they're quiet and sad, you communicate more gently and lower your volume and slow down the pace of your speech. Importantly, to remember, empathy needs to be authentic. It needs to come from a place where you are really trying to understand the experience from the perspective of your teenager and are connecting with that perspective, as this is one of the things that's driving their behaviour. Achieving this authenticity, however, is not always easy. The behaviours our teenagers present with can really successfully wear down our capacity to be empathic. This can be further impacted upon if we've had a hard day at work maybe, or have other stresses in our lives that we're trying to manage. This is the time to offer compassion and empathy to ourselves, and brings us to the final principle that we're going to think about in our lesson today, that of repair. It's inevitable that all of us as parents are going to experience times of misunderstanding, conflict and breakdown in communication with our teenagers. We will often be faced with scenarios where ourselves and our teenagers are in different, perhaps even conflicting positions with regards to our perceptions, desires, motives, etc. You might want them to get to bed as they need a good night's sleep before school the next day. They might want to stay up late gaming. You might think that midnight is a perfectly reasonable time to come home from the party. They might think 2 a.m. is. You might remember saying to them they could have £20 to go out with. They might remember you saying it was 40. Whilst we can use the previous principles of curiosity, acceptance and empathy to have conversations with our teenager at such times in an attempt to head off or resolve conflict, these won't always work. And when they don't, we may experience ruptures in our relationship with them that require repair. In the next lesson, we're going to think about how we as parents need to understand how our own behaviour contributes to these ruptures. But for now, we're going to focus just on how we offer repair, because if we don't take responsibility for this ourselves, as the adult, this rupture can lead to a deeper sense of disconnection, and this can lead to further conflict and confrontation with our teenager. Repair is certainly an interactive process that will ultimately need to involve both yourself and your teenager. However, it begins with our own process of emotional regulation. We cannot repair with our teenager if we're still feeling angry towards them. So this is our starting point. How am I going to manage my anger so that I can then help my teenager with theirs? In this context, our attachment strategy, if you remember back to the previous lesson in this part of the course, may be to push those feelings down and pretend they don't exist. Or it may be to show them in explosive ways to make sure others are aware of how we're feeling. Neither of these strategies are particularly helpful for repair for you or your teenager, because neither are experiences of what we call regulated emotions. These responses are either going to minimise or exaggerate the situation. Instead, we need to create a space where we can connect with what emotions are being invoked in us and gain perspective on those, so they can be communicated back to our teenager in a measured and helpful way, rather than creating further conflict or shame. Most ruptures cannot be resolved immediately. We usually need some time as well as space to process events and work out the attached feelings. We will all have different ways of creating this time and space. It may be leaving to go into another room in the house for a few minutes just to take some deep breaths and calm down. It may be needing to do something physical like go for a run or a walk. It may be to call a friend and talk through the situation with them perhaps. Once you've achieved a calmer state of mind and have some clarity on the situation, the next step is to think about the ways in which you can reconnect with your teenager. Remember the rule of authenticity, however. Don't rush to repair. It's better to leave it for longer and be able to then come back together and offer reconnection in a genuine and authentic way. Also, use your knowledge and understanding of your teenager to gauge when is the right time to approach them to offer that repair. Younger children, at times of repair, may need this to happen quickly, and they may require closeness and physical connection to achieve this. Your teenager, on the other hand, may need a little longer and may need some physical space. Remember that even though they may not be able to show it, your teenager does want to get along with you. Their disconnected emotional and thinking brain will, however, make it difficult for them to take responsibility for their repair. Whilst you may feel that the rupture has come about solely through the behaviour of your teenager, we cannot put the responsibility of repair onto their shoulders. This is hard, especially when we spend much of our time when our children are little encouraging them to apologise for things that they have done wrong. It's going to mean swallowing some pride, but if we remember what's going on in the teenage brain, we have to be the ones to take on the role as adult and parent to initiate that repair. And we have to do this at a time when both you and your teenager have calmed down and are able to discuss the rupture in a productive way. Holding in mind our previous principles of curiosity, acceptance and empathy, we might start the repair with something like, "This has been really difficult for both of us to be fighting like this. I can see that you felt really angry with me for not letting you go out tonight, and I'm really sorry I made you feel that way. I know having these kind of rules is really hard for you, but we're going to need to find a way of managing that better, because it's important we have them to keep you safe and to look after you. I really hope we can find a way of being able to do this. Do you think we can talk about that to see if we can come up with something?" Once you've offered this olive branch, you can give them space to share their feelings and thoughts, using your active listening and reflective thinking skills to demonstrate your openness to hearing their perspective. The conversation can then hopefully follow with each of you sharing your own thoughts, feelings, perspectives and ideas for resolution, and your teenager possibly even offering that apology that you've been encouraging in them since they were little. So what's important to remember from today's lesson? Even though our teenagers' developmental task is to learn how to separate from us, they continue to need the connection that our relationship offers them to experience safety and security that allows them to learn the skills necessary to succeed in this. We build and maintain connection through a number of processes, including showing curiosity with regards to their inner emotional world, acceptance of that world, and empathy and understanding without judgment. Whilst we need to provide them still with structure, supervision, rules and boundaries, if we do this alongside these principles, our teenager is likely to be more accepting of them. If we can find ways of bringing these principles of curiosity, acceptance and empathy into our relationships with our teenagers, not only do conflicts around their behaviour become easier to resolve, but such conflicts will be less likely to happen in the first place. And when they do occur, because they will still, we have ways in which we can re-establish safety and calm in our relationship that teaches our teenager that despite the ruptures, the strength of the connection and love for them hasn't changed. Using these principles shows our teenager that difficult feelings don't have to be denied or ignored, but can be put into words, sat with, and then heard, listened to and validated, so they become less scary, unpleasant, and easier to manage. They learn that even whilst they're moving away from us and may even feel they don't need us anymore, we continue to be available to them to support them with their difficult emotions. And that even if we don't have all the answers right now, we can work some of them out together and find solutions for the future. This lesson has hopefully given you some ideas of how conversations could work between yourself and your teenager, offering you examples of language that you can use to incorporate these principles into your relationship with them. But the really important thing is finding your own ways of doing this. You will have different versions of these conversations that you will end up having using language that suits you, feels more comfortable to you. You may have to play around with these ideas a little bit before you find what works for you and what works for your teenager. And as with our previous lessons, if you feel comfortable doing so, please share any of your thoughts, your observations or experiences with us in the comments. We'd really love to hear about how you're getting on using these ideas with your teenager and how you're finding these lessons are helping you to understand and relate to them better. Thanks for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.